Some books aren't just stories, they're the foundation of children's literature. Today I'm diving into the earliest children's classics, the ones that shaped everything from Disney movies to the books that we hand our children today. And stick with me to the end because I'm going to be sharing the book that still captivates my children over 100 years after it was written and past the age that the book was written for. The books I'm sharing today are all pre-1950. These are true classics. They're written in a very, very different world than the one that we live in today. They introduce things like animals that talk and whimsical fantasies, as well as heartwarming frontier type stories. Even though the language in some of these books can seem out of date or old-fashioned, these books are so good for our kids. They give you many opportunities for discussion, but also I like my kids to have a broad vocabulary, so I don't mind that they're using words that aren't necessarily used in speech today. Aesop's Fables. This is a collection of short stories that uses tall tales, animals, and everyday scenarios to teach children morals. You ever heard the moral of the story? Aesop's Fables is full of morals of the story. Some other commonly used phrases like slow and steady wins the race or don't cry wolf, these came from Aesop's Fables. You might already be reading these in your homeschool, but if not, I just have to give a shout out because even with my kids being a little bit older, we're still enjoying these Aesop's Fables. The stories are simple enough that small children can understand them, but they still resonate with adults. And they have been told and retold for centuries. Another absolute classic is The Tale of Peter Rabbit, or generally all the books written and illustrated by Beatrix Potter. I found this gem at a Goodwill for $1 and it's amazing. The Complete Tales of Beatrix Potter. The Tale of Peter Rabbit is the most well-known. Obviously there's even a movie adaptation about Peter Rabbit, but there's a whole other cast of characters in the Beatrix Potter world that you don't want to miss. If you don't know who Peter Rabbit is, let me explain. Peter is a curious, naughty little rabbit, and he gets into a lot of trouble by not heeding his mother's advice and really her rules, which was don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. He decides to go anyway, and he gets caught in some pretty precarious situations. Now, the story is actually kind of intense. I remember as a small child being a little anxious because the stakes are really high. For a rabbit in early England, what might happen to a rabbit, I think we can all kind of imagine. So the stakes are really high, but Beatrix Potter makes it a little bit more gentle by having these beautiful illustrations that go along with the story to make it less intense, less scary for a small child. Winnie the Pooh. In Winnie the Pooh, we get introduced to Christopher Robin and his friends in the 100-Acre Wood. Now, as an adult, of course, I knew Winnie the Pooh and felt like I already knew the story. But when my children were school age, I began to read it out loud to them. And it turns out there's just so much more to the Winnie the Pooh story than what you see on Disney. You get to know the characters so much better in the book, like Eeyore, Kanga, Tigger, and Piglet. You just get to know them so much more in a book or a series of books than you do in a movie or a television series. The stories are really whimsical on the surface, but they're layered with so much depth and warmth that adults can appreciate them as well. I know I do. And it's a really great example of using your imagination because that's what Christopher is doing. He's using his imagination, playing with his stuffed animals that are all these beloved characters. The Velvetine Rabbit. Talk about a tearjerker even as a child. I was so moved by this story. I remember listening to it many times as I was growing up, and every time at the end, I just felt so many big emotions. It's the story of a little boy whose love makes the rabbit real. So it follows this little boy who has a velvet rabbit, and he loves the rabbit, he adores the rabbit, and he plays with it and brings it along his adventures. And you're coming at it from the perspective of the toy rabbit. As the boy cherishes the rabbit gets to see how love changes things and how it has the power to transform. Sorry about the sun. I feel like now I look kind of crazy, but I can't control it. It's just doing what it wants. It's a gentle story, and the ending is a little bittersweet, but it is a beautiful story about childhood, loss, and the magic of unconditional love. The Wind and the Willows. I actually bought myself this book when I was 12 years old. I got some birthday money and I picked it out at Barnes & Noble. It tells the story of mole, toad, rat, and badger as they are journeying down a peaceful English river. They go along the riverbank and then they go inland some, and they have many adventures along the way. Toad is the funniest of all the characters. I love all of them for different reasons, but Toad is the one I probably quote the most because he's just a unique character. He's very reckless and he gets into all kinds of different situations. The book balances humor, mischief, and lyrical descriptions of nature. Such a precious story. I've read it to my children many times, and obviously I've loved it since I was at least 12. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. True story, I read this to my kids about 2 years ago because I just realized it was a classic I'd never read. People quoted it a lot. I just felt a little bit out of the loop and I decided to read it. And it did not disappoint. Now, I will say that Lewis Carroll's writing style is a little bit wonky for me. Like, I just have a little bit of a harder time like connecting to it. But the story itself is a classic and the poems in there made me laugh out loud. It was just, the story was just so fantastical that I felt like I could hardly keep up. But the kids really enjoyed it and made a very long lasting impression. And I 100% enjoyed the book more than the movie. It's about Alice and she falls into a rabbit hole, into a magical world of talking animals, eccentric characters, and some very weird, curious riddles. The story is like absurd. It's just so out there, but that's what it's meant to be. Like, it's all got a little bit of like absurdity, lots of wordplay, and it will 1000% spark the imagination. It is still one of the most imaginative stories in children's literature for obvious reasons. It feels like you're on some kind of a strange dream, as it were. The Secret Garden, another book I've had since I was very young, probably 10-ish. It is about Mary Lennox. She is recently orphaned. She goes to live with her uncle, and she ends up finding a key and unlocking a door to a forgotten / abandoned garden. With the help of some friends, she starts working to bring it back to life. I love this story. My mom loved gardening and flowers, and that's probably why she got me this book, was because it talks so much about that and finding new life in the garden. As fall becomes winter and winter into spring, the garden transforms, and so does Mary. She goes from being a sad, lonely, hurt little girl, and hurt people tend to hurt people, so she was not doing so hot, to a kind child filled with love and joy and compassion. It's a story of friendship, hope, and the healing power of nature, which I love that as a story. Something to help children to even understand how good it is for us to be out in nature. As a nature lover myself, this really just hits in a deeper way. Little House in the Big Woods and A Farmer's Boy are two more classics. They were written by Laura Ingalls Wilder. This is book 1 in the series. This is book 3 in the series of the Laura Ingalls Wilder series. Laura is telling stories of her own childhood, and then Farmer Boy is telling the stories of her husband later on. Like, later you meet her husband, but the first 2 books are about Laura and her family, then it goes to her husband's family, then the rest of the series is again about Laura, and later on about her and Alonzo, her husband, once they meet and have a life together. The story of Laura Ingalls Wilder is following Laura as her family travels from Wisconsin to all the other places they go. I think all of book 1 is pretty much set in Wisconsin, and then The Farmer Boy is about Alonzo, who was in New York at the time of his childhood. They both were raised on a farm, and just like a very different experience than most kids today. And so in that way, again, just like a very interesting read, very different life that they were leading that we can read to our children about. Both of the books are painting very vivid pictures of what it was like to be a pioneer in early America. Stuart Little. Again, the movie is great. The one with the guy who plays the main character in House, Laurie something Laurie, whatever his name is. That movie I really enjoyed. However, the book I enjoyed even more. It tells the story of Stuart Little, who's a mouse being raised by humans. He faces a lot of different challenges, but he faces them with courage and cleverness, as mice are known for, probably from Aesop's fables. And his story ranges from sailing boats in Central Park to searching for a lost friend. Much like lots of E.B. White's books, like Charlotte's Web, it blends humor and tenderness and a sense of wonder. Swiss Family Robinson, such a fun, adventurous classic. After being shipwrecked on a deserted island, the family has to work together to learn how to survive on this deserted island. I think we can imagine how challenging that might be. So, using some ingenuity, teamwork, and faith, they create shelter, tame some pretty wild animals, and explore their new environment. The story highlights resilience, resourcefulness, and the bonds of family in the face of hardship. I used to wonder if my kids would enjoy these older books like they were written so long ago, but honestly, Beatrix Potter, even though it was written for very small children, still completely hooks my kids today. And even though you would think they would have outgrown a story that was written for small children, they haven't. It's still so good, so entertaining, still completely has them engrossed in the story every time I read it. I would say every single story on this list is not only timeless, it's also ageless. So here's my challenge for you. Pick an early classic to read this year, just one to read aloud to your kids. You might be surprised how they respond. And in my next video, I'm going to be talking about modern classics, and that list is just as good. Oh my gosh, so many good books on that list. That's going to be from the 1950s and beyond. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day.